Discussion. Thanks so much for that. I think it's been incredible to see how we've jumped from the global food crisis to digital inclusion to LGBTQ inclusion, but also to see that all of these things are deeply interlinked. And it may be that there's no case in which that's more evident than what we're about to talk about, which is the crisis in Ukraine, with reverberations across the world. I'm Michael Igoe, senior reporter at Devex. I'm really honored to welcome up to the stage some fantastic speakers who are going to dive into this topic, which is dominating the headlines here at UNGA. And that's Natalie Jaresko, the former Minister of Finance of Ukraine, and Nate Schenkkan, a senior director of research at Freedom House. Thank you both for being here. We also have joining us from Ukraine, Minister of Parliament, Yulia Klymenko, and I'm so delighted that there you are on the screen. Yulia, thanks for being here. It's just absolutely wonderful to have your participation today.
Hello, Prof. Kiev.
And we're going to start with you, Yulia, to bring us, to whatever extent you're able, to the situation that you're facing today. Many of us here are doing our very best to keep up to date with the headlines that are changing on a daily basis. The situation in your country, as I said, has really been the dominating issue of this UNGA week. Can you just help us understand what it's like to be working in the government right now and what you're dedicating your time and attention to?
Hi, it's so good to be with you, and thanks for hosting me and on behalf of my country. Actually, I'm in Kiev all the whole time of invasion and occupation. I never left Kiev, maybe sometimes for the regions in Ukraine, but I've never left, even understanding that it could be occupied any time. So. We have today. We have 211th day of full-scale war, invasion of Russia, and despite that, Putin said that they will took Kiev and Ukraine in 2 days. Today we have 211th day, and still Putin cannot even occupy 20% of Ukraine. It's less than 20%, and we are successfully pushing out Russian forces, armed forces from Ukraine. Yes, it's difficult, but I can tell you that I'm proud of my country, and I'm really, see strong and brave, and the largest army in our continent, Ukrainian army, and the 40 million of Ukrainians who are helping every day our army, and even Ukrainians, donated money and bought satellites to see Russians in details more clearly. Actually, we are fighting. We will fight for our independence and for our country and families. Despite this Russian propaganda, disinformation that Ukraine is a failed state and we should be under the Russian protection, this is not true. And Ukraine actually now is probably the strongest and the bravest nation, and we operates in the parliament, in the government, in the local authorities, as well as healthcare and education from day one of the full-scale invasion, which happened 24th of February 2022. So all our financial services, including Visa, because I saw a previous panel, all public services, including social payments, pensions, all healthcare services, and also education for all our over 6 million kids, online and offline, provided from the day one of the full-scale invasion. So yes, we have war, but we are a country which operates, and we have also even started and already presented recovery plan despite the war war is still ongoing. We have this plan, and we presented it in Switzerland in summer. It consists of over 500 projects, and these projects, the amount of total cost of these projects approximately, and total cost of reconstruction we needed, it's 600 billion dollars, and I think it will be even more when we will see they occupied all territories, and we clearly for ourselves as a country and as a politicians understand that these projects and the new reconstruction of the country should be first of all creating a lot of jobs, a number of jobs for Ukrainians who is coming back from Europe, from any other countries where they had to flee. Also, it should be growth of GDP, and also it should be definitely based on energy efficiently, new technologies, and the Green Deal, which we already signed before the war. So I'm in Kiev, my family in Kiev, my husband were helping army, my kids going to French school in Kiev, my youngest kids, because I have also kids in the university. So we are here. We are not gonna leave the country, and we will fight till the victory.
Thank you. Natalie, let me turn to you. I know this is an old colleague of yours, and I'm sure that's powerful to hear. You also have prior experience managing an economy through a period of war and crisis, really an extension or previous installment of this same war. Help us understand the scale of the challenge that Ukraine is facing right now in terms of keeping that economy afloat and sustaining the types of services that Yulia is talking about here today.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Yulia, for inspiring us all. When I was minister in 2014 and Russia had just invaded and occupied Crimea and then Donbass, we saw a decline in GDP of about 10%. And it was terribly painful. The banking system had been poorly regulated and began to fall apart. The currency devalued some 50% because it had previously been held to a fixed exchange rate by the outgoing regime. And we had just come out of the Maidan, the Revolution of Dignity. And so the country was under enormous pressure. We didn't have a military. The previous regime had destroyed the military. And so we had many volunteers going to try and defend. And everything needed to be turned around. We needed to not only kind of build from the ground up, regulate the banking system, shutting half of them down. In fact, about 150 banks got shut down in that next year. Strengthen the currency, build international reserves, build a program to bring the economy back, all while starting to invest for the first time 5% of GDP into national security. And that was the beginning of building the army that you see today. That is the armed forces of today. It's been built over 8 years, not over 30, not over 100, but in 8 years from scratch. What you see today is a much more resilient Ukrainian economy. In fact, the devastation is much, much worse over a much greater part of the territory, not 7% of the territory, but 20% of the territory. And yet the banking system is fully functional. The internet is fully functional. Government services are being delivered at all levels, as Yulia mentioned, from pensions to support for those internally displaced. So from one perspective, it is much more resilient, and that's a result of 8 years of reforms. It's a much better economy than it was 8 years ago when they invaded. On the other hand, the devastation is tremendously worse. 15 million people have been displaced, half of whom approximately have left the country as refugees, and half who remain internally displaced in their own country, often having to have left their homes with a plastic bag of belongings. In addition to that, this has been a very concerted effort on the part of Putin and the Russians to destroy Ukraine's economy. I'll give you 2 examples, agriculture and energy. In the case of agriculture, they have specifically targeted fields of grain, burning them so they cannot be harvested. Silos, agricultural infrastructure, equipment have been bombed and mined. And then, of course, the ports were blocked, only recently unblocked in a special agreement with the United Nations and Turkey. But we've had about 3 billion metric tons exported compared to some 45, 48 billion metric tons last year. And farmers are having to try and collect grain while bombs are flying and land has been mined. There are tens of thousands of mines covering about 160,000 square kilometers. So the Russians have targeted agriculture to try and destroy a part of the economy that represents 20% of the labor force, 11% of GDP, and 40% of our exports. And it feeds, as we all talked earlier, 400 million people outside of Ukraine, 70 million of which are facing famine as a result of a targeting of this sector. Similarly, they targeted the energy sector. They have destroyed electrical facilities. They have taken the second largest nuclear power plant hostage and blackmailing the world. And in the last week, twice, they have bombed within 300 meters or close to 2 different nuclear power stations. So half of Ukraine's renewable energy is located in occupied territories. So you can see this is a very concerted effort to destroy the economy. And what that means is Ukraine today faces monthly about a $5 billion budget deficit. In order to accomplish the things Yulia talked about, social services, support for IDPs, paying your teachers, paying your medical staff, they're running about a $5 billion a month budget deficit. That's being covered right now by the United States, the European Union, other G7 members, and some of the international financial institutions. However, that support was announced for a 6-month period. And right now, the number one issue is going beyond that 6 months, which ends September, October. You know, you can stretch things as a finance minister, I can tell you, but you can't stretch it more than a month or 2. And the real reason why this is critical is because if you can imagine anything worse than war, it's hyperinflation during war. And if Ukraine doesn't receive on a timely basis that support for the budget, it has to print. And hyperinflation is the only thing that could make this horrendous war worse. So we need to avoid that and keep Western support for that urgent need. The second level of urgency is what I'll call urgent reconstruction. And that's when we liberate territories, which our armed forces have successfully done, especially in the last weeks. You need to restore water, heat, electricity, basic housing for people. And one of the reasons you need to do that is because you need to build morale amongst your population and amongst those refugees who want to come home. But as a mom, think about it, or a dad, but I'm a mom. So as a mom, you're not going to go back unless your kids can go to school. You're not going to go back until, frankly speaking, you have a job and you can put food on the table. And so there's some very basic needs that need to be rebuilt in these recently liberated territories. The government said that that's about $17 billion that they need for next year. And then there's the reconstruction. Yulia mentioned there's a plan, and a World Bank estimate just came out last week with about a $350 billion estimate. The government has said 600. After my experience in Puerto Rico, would tell you that I think it's going to be close to $1 trillion when all is said and done. And that's going to require the public sector, the private sector, and frankly speaking, we need to look to Russia for the most significant part. They caused the destruction. It's their confiscated state and private assets that ought to go towards, in the first place, rebuilding Ukraine.
It's a really powerful and clear explanation of the size of the challenge, which in a previous interview, I think you described to me as what is likely to be the largest reconstruction effort in history. Is that still how you see it?
It is indeed. People compare it to the Marshall Plan, but the Marshall Plan was, in today's dollars, about $200 billion. And really wasn't about reconstruction. It was really about infusing Europe in a financial and economic space that would keep them all both liquid, but also interrelated and interdependent. This is really something closer to what we had to do in the Balkans, but at a much larger scale, or in Liberia, or in Iraq, or in Afghanistan. And this is just, with each day, you know, there's more devastation. With each day, there's more bombing and missiles. And so with each day, the destruction continues to grow.
Nate, I want to bring you in here. The reason that we're here at all is because of a really stunning citizen mobilization in Ukraine that's captivated the world and clearly, I think, caught Vladimir Putin by surprise. What does it tell you about Ukrainian democracy, Ukraine's institutions? And does that hold for other countries that democracy advocates might seek to support?
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Michael. And it's an honor to be here speaking with you all. It does hold lessons. And I would encourage people to think back to February 23rd, before the invasion, and the kind of narrative that was widespread about how this war was about to go, about the efficiency of the Russian machine, about the organization and single-minded dedication that Russia would bring to this savage attack, and the disorganization and the chaos in Ukraine that they were going to find. I think that was very much the expectation, including from a lot of professionals, military analysts and others who spend their entire jobs looking at this, and they missed it. And what they missed is two things. They missed, on the one side, they missed how far Ukraine had come, including especially on the institutional development level, at the level of the rebuilding of the state, the rebuilding of state institutions in the economy, the rebuilding of independent institutions in the media, in the civil society, decentralization, strengthening of local governance, and the ways in which those had built among Ukrainians real buy-in in the state, and not just in the West, not just in the places where people maybe would have considered, in a conventional analysis of Ukraine, Ukrainian national identity would be the strongest, but in the whole state, in the whole territory. And then on the other side, what they missed very strongly is the classic problems of authoritarianism, the classic problems of bad information that comes back to the leader because he doesn't want to hear it, of corruption, grand corruption, theft, poor maintenance of military equipment, poor training, abuse in the barracks, and a single leader who gets fixated on a very stupid idea and then doesn't give up. And so I think there's some very stark things that the expert community, the international community has to think about the ways in which we've told ourselves a story about the efficiency of authoritarianism, about the efficiency of these rising states, or in Russia's case, perhaps not rising, but continuing a long tradition across multiple empires, and the ways in which they would adapt in the 21st century. And perhaps the adaptation is not as strong as we thought. Perhaps the adaptation actually is kind of a hollow shell. And then I just wanted to say a couple other things here, more schematically about, I understand that the situation is definitely very grim. The situation is very serious. I think we do need to talk about the details of the seriousness and be prepared to respond to them, because that's the only way we can in a serious technical sense. At the same time, I want to underscore that I think out of this war and the fact that Ukraine is winning this war will come enormous potential to transform this region most immediately, and with it, I think a lot of dynamics at the global level. At the regional level, I think obviously the first thing is that Ukraine has to win. They simply have to, and I don't think there's any question about that. I don't think there's any question in my mind that Ukraine can. So making the resources available is the first priority. When that happens, there is a big shift that will now come in the regional order in Europe and in Eurasia. This overwhelming dynamic post-Cold War, in which there were various attempts to include Russia, to integrate Russia into regional orders, at the same time as Russia was building its own alternative order through the CSTO, through the SCO. These things are going to close. We're going to close that chapter of history. That relationship between Russia and Europe is not going to be the same. And there are going to be, with that, great opportunities, I think, for Ukraine, for Moldova, for the South Caucasus, potentially, if they want to be there, for Belarus. Certainly the people of Belarus want to be there. Whether the regime does, I don't know. To rewrite this regional order in a way that is more democratic. And we can have another wave of democracy. And I think that's a testament to the Ukrainian people, to be frank. We wouldn't be here if the Ukrainians hadn't done what they've done. And I think we should grab it. I think for the global perspective, I would also urge people to see that this shift away from accepting the fate of European, in particular, dependence on Russian gas, which has been an overwhelming dynamic for the last 30 years, but accepting now, acknowledging that that chapter is also closed, is a tremendous potential opportunity to transform the whole energy dynamic on a very, heavy energy consumption continent in Europe. And with that, to help us meet our energy goals, to help us avert some of the consequences of climate change. This is something that we can do. So I really think that the message out of this war is that democracies can do it. We don't have to accept the fate that we seem to have been resigning ourselves to over the last, 5-10 years, saying, eventually we'll all be overtaken and sort of swallowed by this more malicious kind of authoritarian set of systems. We can actually do this. So let's go do it. Let's not hold back. Let's dive in and embrace it. Thank you.
Yulia, I want to get your take on that. You gave us a glimpse of the work that you're doing and your colleagues are doing to sustain critical services through this period of crisis and conflict. Are you also seeing in this longer term opportunities to continue some of the work of reform and transformation that your fellow panelists have alluded to here? Do you have the mental space to even think about the future in that way at this moment? And if so, where do you see those opportunities?
Actually, I think, first of all, democracy must win. It's not, we have no other choice. Either we will, all fell down into the authoritarian regimes, or democracy prevails, win, and we can build, so to say, new geopolitical order. Because at this point of time, let's be honest, we don't have order. A strong man trying to invade neighbors. We can see it not only with Ukraine, but also with Taiwan and other countries in the globe. But coming back to your question, I think we have to do in parallel, and we're doing it in parallel. First, we are fighting with the enemy. And the second, we are transforming and changing the country, including transforming and changing institutions. So despite the war, the parliament passed over 600 bills and big bills as well concerning regarding reforms in different sectors. And we clearly understand that we have to pass more, because we actually have to join European Union. That the European Union granted us a candidacy. But our goal is to join European Union, to be a member, and for that we need to do a homework, and that's why over 80 bills, so to say, Euro integration bills already on the table in the Parliament and the government, and we are doing our homework. So it's a parallel, so to say, tracks, and there is no new Ukraine without these both tracks. From one side we are fighting on the front line, on another we are fighting inside the country, because that you have already established system established in the Soviet Union, I would say, that producing corruption, trying to build to build Soviet Union inside the Ukraine. And so these people should go out, and we have to build a new, as I'm saying, a new country, a new car, not to repair old one. And this is also regards to the reconstruction. We will not build and repair old plants, inefficient, built during infrastructure, very energy efficient, built in the Soviet Union. We have to build new with the new technologies, with the future technologies. We are very, IT developed country. We have a lot of services, even passports. Our passports we have online. We have all our documents online, and we are not taking our passports with us. And the same with many other documents, even birth certificates you can get. Immediate after you gave birth to the kids, so like in 2 minutes. And we have to take this, because you discussed the digitalization, you discussed many other things in the previous panels, and Ukraine could help with this. We could help with the food security, because we are feeding 400 million, as Natalia said, all over the world. The food prices and inflation and energy inflation in the world, it's also due to the war in Ukraine, because we are producing and exporting over 60 million tons per year. So we are feeding a lot of countries in Africa and Asia. So if we can operate, our ports are unblocked, we can feed the world. We can solve partially problems with the food security. But as I would like to finish my speech, that Putin using food as a weapon. He weaponized food, and he clearly blocked our ports to blackmailing the whole world, including Asia and Africa, to which will lead to the migration, as you also discussed, to other countries, and huge geopolitical consequences and changing of regimes. So it's not only military invasion; it's a hybrid war against the whole world. So we have to consider it, and as my colleague said, to help Ukraine win this war and to liberate not only Ukraine and our territories, but liberate democracy in the world.
I'm going to get in trouble for this because that says 0. But Natalie, last word to you. What do Ukraine's international partners need to do now to hold up their end of the bargain and see this through to the end?
Well, the phrase is one I think you've all heard before. Number 1, we need weapons. Number 2, weapons. And number 3, weapons. Because the only way for us to end this war is to prevail and to push them out. And so the first and most important thing is for Ukraine to prevail and to end this war as soon as possible. Obviously, after that, there is a great need for financial support that I described. And lastly, we need to start thinking and developing the coordination mechanisms, the planning mechanisms for that reconstruction, because the Marshall Plan didn't actually come about until, maybe 5 years after World War II was over. We don't want to wait 5 years. We have 7 million Ukrainians who want to come home. We want them to come home. That's the future labor force of this country. So to save the economy, to ensure that this Western support is needed for the shortest period of time possible, we need to accelerate the end of the war, our support for reconstruction, and then the Ukrainian people will clearly take it to the next steps on their own.
Thank you so much. And the sun is coming out. Please thank my panelists here.